The Awakening by Kate Chopin, Chapter 9. Every light in the hall was ablaze. Every lamp turned as high as it could be without smoking the chimney or threatening explosion. The lamps were fixed at intervals against the wall, encircling the whole room. Someone had gathered orange and lemon branches, and with these fashioned graceful festoons between. The dark green of the branches stood out and glistened against the white muslin curtains which draped the windows, and which puffed, floated, and flapped at the capricious will of a stiff breeze that swept up from the Gulf. It was Saturday night, a few weeks after the intimate conversation held between Robert and Madame Ratonneau on their way from the beach. An unusual number of husbands, fathers, and friends had come down to stay over Sunday, and they were being suitably entertained by their families, with the material help of Madame Lebrun. The dining tables had all been removed to one end of the hall, and the chairs ranged about in rows and in clusters. Each little family group had had its say and exchanged its domestic gossip earlier in the evening. There was now an apparent disposition to relax, to widen the circle of confidences, and to give a more general tone to the conversation. Many of the children had been permitted to sit up beyond their usual bedtime. A small band of them were lying on their stomachs on the floor, looking at the colored sheets of the comic papers which Mr. Pontellier had brought down. The little Pontellier boys were permitting them to do so, and making their authority felt. Music, dancing, and a recitation or two were the entertainments furnished, or rather offered. But there was nothing systematic about the program, no appearance of prearrangement, nor even premeditation. At an early hour in the evening, the Farvel twins were prevailed upon to play the piano. They were girls of 14 and always clad in the Virgin's colors, blue and white, having been dedicated to the Blessed Virgin at their baptism. They played a duet from Zampa, and at the earnest solicitation of everyone present, followed it with the overture to The Poet and the Peasant. "Allez-vous-en, sapristi!" shrieked the parrot outside the door. He was only being present who possessed sufficient candor to admit that he was not listening to these gracious performances for the first time that summer. Old Monsieur Farival, grandfather of the twins, grew indignant over the interruption, and insisted upon having the bird removed and consigned to regions of darkness. Victor Lebrun objected, and his decrees were as immutable as those of fate. The parrot unfortunately offered no further interruption to the entertainment, the whole venom of his nature apparently having been cherished up and hurled against the twins in that one impetuous outburst. Later, a younger brother and sister gave recitations, which everyone present had heard many times at winter evening entertainments in the city. A little girl performed a skirt dance at the center of the floor. The mother played her accompaniments, and at the same time watched her daughter with greedy admiration and nervous apprehension. She need have had no apprehension. The child was mistress of the situation. She had been properly dressed for the occasion in black tulle and black silk tights. Her little neck and arms were bare, and her hair, artificially crimped, stood out like fluffy black plumes over her head. Her poses were full of grace, and her little black shod toes twinkled as they shot out and upward with a rapidity and suddenness which were bewildering. But there was no reason why everyone should not dance. Madame Ratonneau could not, so it was she who gaily consented to play for the others. She played very well, keeping excellent waltz time, and infusing an expression into the strains which was indeed inspiring. She was keeping up her music on account of the children, she said, because she and her husband both considered it a means of brightening the home and making it attractive. Almost everyone danced but the twins, who could not be induced to separate during the brief period when one or the other should be whirling around the room in the arms of a man. They might have danced together, but they did not think of it. The children were sent to bed. Some went submissively, others with shrieks and protests as they were dragged away. They'd been permitted to sit up till after the ice cream, which naturally marked the limit of human indulgence. The ice cream was passed around with cake, gold and silver cake arranged on platters in alternate slices. It had been made and frozen during the afternoon back of the kitchen by two black women under the supervision of Victor. It was pronounced a great success. Excellent if it only contained a little less vanilla or a little more sugar, if it had been frozen a degree harder, and if the salt might have been kept out of portions of it. Victor was proud of his achievement and went about recommending it and urging everyone to partake of it to excess. After Mrs. Pontellier had danced twice with her husband, once with Robert, and once with Monsieur Ratinal, who was thin and tall and swayed like a reed in the wind when he danced. She went out on the gallery and seated herself on the low window-sill, where she commanded a view of all that went on in the hall, and could look out toward the gulf. There was a soft effulgence in the east. The moon was coming up, and its mystic shimmer was casting 1,000,000 lights across the distant, restless water. "Would you like to hear Mademoiselle Rise play?" asked Robert, coming out on the porch where she was. Well, of course Edna would like to hear Mademoiselle Rise play, but she feared it be useless to entreat her. "I'll ask her," he said. "I'll tell her what you want to hear. She likes you. She will come." He turned and hurried away to one of the far cottages where Mademoiselle Rise was shuffling away. She was dragging a chair in and out of her room, and at intervals objecting to the crying of a baby, which a nurse in the adjoining cottage was endeavoring to put to sleep. She was a disagreeable little woman, no longer young, who had quarreled with almost everyone, owing to a temper which was self-assertive, and a disposition to trample upon the rights of others. Robert prevailed upon her without any too great difficulty. She entered the hall with him during the lull in the dance. She made an awkward, imperious little bow as she went in. She was a homely woman, with small, weazened face and body and eyes that glowed. She had absolutely no taste in dress, and wore a batch of rusty black lace with a bunch of artificial violets pinned to the side of her hair. "Ask Mrs. Pontellier what she would like to hear me play," she requested of Robert. She sat perfectly still before the piano, not touching the keys, while Robert carried her message to Edna at the window. A general air of surprise and genuine satisfaction fell upon everyone as they saw the pianist enter. There was a settling down and a prevailing air of expectancy everywhere. Edna was a trifle embarrassed at being thus signaled out for the imperious little woman's favor. Well, she would not dare to choose, and begged that Mademoiselle Rise would please herself in her selections. Edna was what she herself called very fond of music. Musical strains, well rendered, had a way of evoking pictures in her mind. She sometimes liked to sit in the room of mornings when Madame Ratinal played or practiced. One piece which that lady played Edna had entitled Solitude. It was a short, plaintive minor strain. The name of the piece was something else, but she called it Solitude. When she heard it, there came before her imagination the figure of a man standing beside a desolate rock on the seashore. He was naked. His attitude was one of hopeless resignation as he looked down towards a distant bird winging its flight away from him. Another piece called to her mind a dainty young woman clad in an empire gown, taking mincing dancing steps as she came down a long avenue between tall hedges. Again, another reminded her of children at play, and still another of nothing on earth but a demure lady stroking a cat. The very first chords which Mademoiselle Rise struck upon the piano sent a keen tremor down Mrs. Pontellier's spinal column. It was not the first time she heard an artist at the piano. Perhaps it was the first time she was ready. Perhaps the first time her being was tempered to take an impress of the abiding truth. She waited for the material pictures which she thought would gather and blaze before her imagination, but she waited in vain. She saw no pictures of solitude, of hope, of longing, or of despair. But the very passions themselves were aroused within her soul, swaying it, lashing it, as the waves daily beat upon her splendid body. She trembled. She was choking, and the tears blinded her. Mademoiselle had finished. She arose, and bowing her stiff, lofty bow, she went away, stopping for neither thanks nor applause. As she passed along the gallery, she patted Edna upon the shoulder. "Well, how did you like my music?" she asked. The young woman was unable to answer. She pressed the hand of the pianist convulsively. Mademoiselle Rise perceived her agitation and even her tears. She patted her again upon the shoulder as she said, "You are the only one worth playing for. Those others, pah!" And she went shuffling and sidling down on the long gallery toward her room. But she was mistaken about those others. Her playing had aroused a fever of enthusiasm. What passion! What an artist! I've always said no one could play Chopin like Mademoiselle Rise. That last prelude, bon Dieu, it shakes a man. It was growing late, and there was a general disposition to disband. But someone, perhaps it was Robert, thought of a bath at that mystic hour, and under that mystic moon.